Alright guys, this is going to be a pretty short lecture. We're going to talk about scene setup for rigging and like how to set up a scene so that an animator can just grab the file and just start working without, one, breaking your rig, and two, making sure that everything is kind of laid out the way it's supposed to be laid out. If you've got this file open, you can see we've got a kind of a knight character. He's got a shield and a sword and just a rig, basically. If you drag a box over this entire guy and select him, as you can see, it only selects controls. It does not select the sword or the shield or any of the 3D mesh for this character. This is exactly how we want a scene before we pass it off to an animator. If you look down at the right hand side where the layers are, we've got a layer system set up to where we've got the control layer, bind joint layer, and mesh layer. As you can see, we've got a series of V's, P, and R's in a certain configuration to where for example, stuff that's in the mesh layer, you can't even touch it. Stuff that's in the bind joint layer, which is like the IKs and the bones and things like that, you can't touch that either. The only stuff that you can touch is in the control layer. Another thing is that we don't, because we're going to export this stuff to the game engine, the animations from this character, when we export animations out of this file, the only thing we want to export out of here is bone animation for the character. We don't want to export the sword and the shield or anything else, because the sword and the shield are actually attached in the game engine, not they're just in here for reference in Maya. Okay, but they're attached in the exact same way to the character in the game engine. The other thing is, so these aren't, these are referenced in. Everything that you see in this file is actually referenced in. So if you go up to File, Reference Editor, and open up the Reference Editor, everyone should do this. Please do this. The Reference Editor is like, so this file is basically just a hub, okay? And what it does is it references these other files in here. And the reason we do that is because what it allows us to do is have a series of animation files. So the animator can come in here and animate on this file. But as you can see, one of the files that's referenced in here is called the giant MA. And that's basically, like, for example, if we wanted to make rig changes to this file, we would make them in this giant rig file, and then they would update in all the animation files. So for example, if you go into, we'll just play with this reference editor here for a second. So like, click the check mark next to the shield, and then click it next to the sword. So as you click the check boxes, you can see the weapons turn on and off. And what that's actually doing is it's actually completely removing them from the scene. So for example, if you were going to do like an FBX animation export out of here or a mesh export out of here, you'd want to fire up this reference editor and uncheck those items, because it would literally remove them from the entire scene. Maya would not even know that they're there, and just with a quick check, they can pop in and pop out, which is really cool. What else? So let's go ahead and open up an animation. There's a, as you can see in that file folder system, we've got the folder is called Coliseum Boss, and we've got animations, rig, textures, and weapons. So we've got this laid out nice and neat. If you go into the animations folder and open up, let's go ahead and open up giant two-handed smash. Now since some of this stuff was created with a student version of Maya, it's going to complain a little bit. And some of you guys are going to get like where it's going to ask you for the files to reference. You just got to check both of the checkboxes that have it remember where those files are, and then go ahead and browse to those files. Okay, so go ahead and open up this two-handed smash.
What's going on here? Well, I did the shield and it seemed to work out fine, but now I'm finding chunk.
Where is this?
Should be in storage. Crossing links.
You gotta right click the timeline, playback space, and browse back. Check both of these. Next one is browse. Back there, now shield document. Weapons.
Still looks stupid.
Oh, yeah. So now it's asking for the first one.
Look at that left hand.
Oh.
Please.
I didn't realize. Oh yeah. I didn't realize that the cursor was able to click on things.
What?
It's like in that. It is very weird.
Yes, so he just showed me something kind of funny. The cursor, when you're doing the imports, the cursor keeps spinning. It doesn't say that it's ready. You can go ahead and continue to do stuff while that's doing that. That's actually just sort of a Windows thing, not really a Maya thing. Okay, as we have this animation open, you can scroll through it. This was kind of,
77 frames.
yeah, this was kind of, I think Ira did this one. And, but as you can see, so with this particular one, this boss had 3 phases. So the first phase, the boss started off with a sword and shield. The next, and then you would, when you would beat that phase, the boss would drop the shield, and then you would go into two-handed sword mode. And then when you would drop, when you would beat this mode or phase, the boss would go into like a two-handed fighting thing. So, but as you can see, if you open up the reference editor, the shield is actually removed from this one. So in code, in the game, we would have to tell it when it gets to this phase that the shield, you know, drops or whatever. I can't remember what we did, but something like that. Okay, cool. So we've got this scene. So I want to show you something here. Why this like we do it like this. Go ahead and click File, Save, Scene. Make sure it saves with all the pathing. And then what I want you to do is just open up in the rig file, or rig folder, there's a scene called Giant. Okay? There's a scene called Giant. Go ahead and open up that giant scene. It's just the giant with no weapons. Alright, so once you get that open, what we're going to go ahead and do is, say we've been working on a project for a long time. We're a rigger, we're working in a studio, and this is our project. We've set up this character, animators have been animating on it, and now we get, you know, halfway through the project and oh shit, this guy needs a backpack. Okay? So let's go ahead and give him a backpack. We're going to make a box. And we'll just pretend that this is a backpack model. And I just want you to just create like a backpack looking thing. He's gonna kind of look like Boba Fett a little bit. So in a perfect world, what we would do, and we can actually go ahead and do this, just because we're awesome. Yeah, so make a backpack and put it in his back. And just a cube. Alright, so what we need to do in order to make this to where when we export this character, Unreal will see that backpack, we actually need to add this to the skin of this character. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and add this in. So go ahead and delete history and freeze transformations on the backpack. So edit, delete by type history, modify, freeze transformations. Again, edit, delete by type history, modify, freeze transformations. And you can go ahead and name that cube backpack up in the channel box and layer editor at the top right. And in order to be able to show the bones, actually we don't even need to show the bones. If you open up your hypergraph hierarchy, well, maybe we do need that or not. Yeah. Okay, so go to Windows Hypergraph Hierarchy. So all we've done so far is we've made a box as a backpack, put it in the backpack area, edit, delete by type history, modify, freeze transformations, and now open your Hypergraph Hierarchy, Windows Hypergraph Hierarchy, and what we're going to look for here is it's going to be way down in the joint chain, in this massive joint chain. We're looking for the bind, what's called a bind joint. You see joints that are anim data. We're looking for bind hips. Okay, it's called bind hips. It looks like this. It should be kind of at the bottom. Yeah, you can actually, there's a search at the top. Bind underscore hips. That actually worked. So if you just type in bind underscore hips, capital B, capital H, it'll zoom to it. We just want that selected. Bind underscore hips. So capital B underscore or bind capital B underscore capital H hips. Okay. So select that joint, then shift select the backpack, switch into rigging mode in the upper left. And what we're going to do is we are going to, this is not an influence. An influence would be if we were going to add a joint. We're going to actually add this as a, we're just basically going to bind, add another bind. So open up the bind skin option box. And again, we've selected the backpack and the bind hips joint. And there's some options in here. We're going to leave everything the same. Make sure allow multiple bind poses is on. And there's a, you can uncheck colorize skeleton and then go ahead and just hit apply. And what that's done has added another skin cluster to this this character. Okay. So we've added the backpack into the skin for this character. So now if we export it, Unreal is going to pick it up. And this is really ticking me off, searching for bones through the hypergraph hierarchy. So I'm just going to turn off my mesh layer and turn on my bone layer and make it to where I can select the joints. And there's a joint called bind_spine2, and what we want to do is flood the backpack to bind_spine2. So click the backpack, open up the paint skin weights tool, which is under the rigging tab, and then you're going to find the bind spine 2 joint, and you're just going to flood the backpack to the bind spine 2 joint. So we're just going to do a quick flood. And then when that's flooded, go ahead and set your layers back to the way they were. And you can go ahead and add the backpack to the mesh layer now by selecting the backpack, right click on the mesh layer, add selected objects, so that when you drag over the guy you can't select him. So I moved ahead a little bit there. I'll backtrack. So what we've done is we have flooded the backpack to the bind spine 2 joint, and you can test that out by rotating the chest controller, and as you rotate that you can see that it's now bound to the spine 2 joint. Again, that's under the paint skin weights tool. Click the backpack. Does anybody need any help? Is anybody behind? Because we're about to move forward here.
Yeah, I'm not seeing like joints in my character.
Yeah, it's gonna be in your layer, your second layer.
You just select the hip bone and select the backpack, and then you're going to go to skin, bind skin, and bind it. And then once it's bound, you're going to flood it to that upper spine joint.
Or, yeah, hide it in the layer. The layer. So right now, yeah, the first one. Make sure you tag the box. This one? Is the second one visible? Fine, it's fine. First box.
There.
It's only that on. And then what?
And I'm flooding this all to this one right there.
Yeah, you're gonna select the spine 2, then the backpack, and then not carrying anymore.
Still trying to look at it. Flood, right? Yeah. So fine two and backpack select.
Yeah.
All right, anybody need any help? Anybody still stuck?
I'm catching up.
Then I also need to be on the mesh layer.
So when you got it flooded to the upper spine joint, set your layers back to the way they were. You'll be able to test that by, if you drag a box over your character, it shouldn't select any meshes. It should only select controls. It should not select bones or meshes. And you can see the order that I have my layers set up on the projector. So just set them like that.
Oh, that's what it was. Did you make them, did you make them
Good?
Yep.
All right. So your scene should be like this. Go ahead and save this scene. File save. So we're saving the rig file, okay? So if you have your reference editor open, you'll see that nothing is referenced in the scene. This is just it's its own scene. It's a solo scene. Okay, so now we're going to go and open up that animation file again. The giant two-handed sword smash.
Yeah.
That's odd. Oh, crap. Yeah, so this is interesting. So I opened up mine, but mine actually references the wrong, because I got 2 copies of this on my computer.
They did the same thing on this one.
Because there's a copy of the game on that computer. So some of you guys might have a copy of this game on your computer because this was a class project. So what you can do in the reference editor is just right click on that giant rig and you can replace reference with the whatever giant rig reference that you just worked on where you added the backpack.
There it is.
Yeah. So, alright. So can somebody, so now you can see when we play the animation, guy has his new backpack, moves around just fine. So can somebody explain to me what the heck we just did and why we opened this scene up, what happened? Anybody?
We were able to edit the base mesh and character without having to redo all the rigs
Without having to redo the animation.
or the animation.
Right. Yeah, that's why we do referencing. So if in the middle of the project, if this character needs a wardrobe addition or a new weapon or a new whatever, you just have all these animation files that the animators have done. We don't have to worry about any of those since they reference one rig file. We just change the rig file and then it updates in the in all the animation files because all the animation files reference the rig file.
This is what all RPGs use for the
Fired.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is anybody confused?
I am.
I'm confused too.
It's what they use for stuff like Skyrim. They have to reference all the models for the animation.
Yo.
Okay, so I'm going to show you how to set up some referencing from scratch here. Okay? So I want you to make a new scene.
This is good if we make a game with gears, like Diablo.
Go ahead and file new scene. Come on, guys. New scene. And what we're going to do is, so this is going to be our new scene, and we're going to go ahead and save it. And you can just save this one on the desktop. And we're going to call this, let's call this Boss 2. So save it as Boss 2. It's just an empty scene right now. And then once you save it as Boss 2, go ahead and go to File, open up the reference editor, and what we're going to do is go to File, Create Reference, and you're going to reference in that Coliseum Boss folder, go ahead and reference in the giant rig. And you'll see that it's referenced in. Alright, so that was pretty easy. There's only one problem though. Go ahead and select any one of the controls and look at the naming of that control. So when you reference a file, there's referencing settings, and those referencing settings will pull in a prefix or like colons and crap like this that we don't want. Okay, what's going to happen is that if we pull this into Unreal, everything has this prefix giant colon. Okay, and if we export this, all the bone animations are going to have that prefix as well, and they're not going to match up in Unreal. So we need to modify our referencing settings when we reference this in, so we don't have that giant colon. Okay, so go ahead and open your Boss 2 scene again that was empty, and we're going to reference this again, but we're going to do it the right way. So open up your Boss Scene 2 that's empty, and then open up your reference editor, and you're gonna click on the giant. But we're gonna tweak some settings here that are gonna reference this in the proper way. Okay, so when you select a giant, and scroll down, there's a bunch of settings on the right hand side. And let's go ahead and click option. There's like these little circular ones, and one says use selected namespace as parent and add new namespace string, which is nothing, which is number 2. Go ahead and try that one. And then grab a controller, and that did the same thing. That did not work. So we need to open up Boss 2 and try again. Open up the reference editor, create reference. This time we're going to try the third one, which is merge into selected namespace. And that did it. So when you reference in your character, use that third option, which is the merge option, and now in the upper right you'll see now it just says global_control. It does not have giant colon anymore. So if we were to export this, all of the animation would be able to be found in Unreal. Okay. Alright, so we got this in. Let's go ahead and get a weapon in. Let's pull that sword in. File, create reference. Navigate to the weapons folder, grab the sword, and again make sure that that third option is checked. Merge into selected namespace and rename incoming objects that match. Merge in the sword. Alright, so for this, we're actually going to have to open the character up a little bit. So you can go ahead and hide the mesh layer. Click the V on the mesh layer, and then click the V on the bind joint layer, and then click the R on the bind joint layer, because we need to constrain the sword to the right hand. Actually, you'll have to turn your mesh layer back on. And what you can do, if you hit 4 on your controller, the sword is actually skinned. It's actually bound to a bone in there. So go find that sword bone. It's in the handle. And what you're going to do is select that sword bone and move the bone to inside the hand of the character. So you're going to put it in the hand of the character to where an animator could twist that hand to grip the sword. Again, I'm not moving the sword mesh. You actually can't move the sword mesh because it's bound to a bone. You have to move the bone. So go ahead and move that sword into his hand. Anybody need any help? Anybody behind? Alright, so now we can turn off our mesh layer. And what we need to do, so this character has the ability, the character rig has the ability to switch between, actually turn your mesh layer back on, I'll show you something. So this character rig has the ability to switch between IK and FK arms. Okay, so you can see if you grab, for example, the wrist control and rotate it, it rotates the wrist, well actually the elbow control would be better. So I can rotate the elbow control, and I believe he has a shoulder control somewhere. Might be hidden. Yeah, it's hidden in his shoulder, but you can also rotate the shoulder control via what's called FK. And there's a little triangle above his hand, and if you select that little triangle above his hand in the channel box options, there's FK-IK in the upper right. If you change FK-IK to 1 and then hit enter, his arm will switch to an IK control, and you can move that around via IK instead. Okay. And I'm going to switch it back to FK. So what challenges that this presents is that we need to make sure that the sword is constrained to the right thing, so that if our animator switches between FK and IK, the sword will always stay constrained. So for example, this wrist controller, if we were to constrain the sword to the wrist controller, to where we rotate the wrist controller around and the sword follows it, if the animator were to switch to IK, as you can see, the wrist controller is now gone. It's now a new wrist controller. So if we were to move this in IK, that sword would stay put. So instead of constraining the sword to a control, we're going to constrain the sword to the thing that will always move, which is the hand joint. Okay? So turn off your mesh layer. And what we're going to do is we're going to constrain that sword bone to the hand joint. We're not parenting it, we're constraining it. So this sword won't actually be in the joint chain, it's just sort of like kind of glued on. Alright? So the way that constraints work is you select the hand joint first, then shift select the sword joint, constrain parent. So now if you rotate the hand control, the sword will now follow it because the sword joint is constrained to the hand joint. So I'll say that again. In order to constrain it, you select the hand joint first, shift select the sword joint, constrain parent. Everybody got that? If you hit 4 on your keyboard, you can go into wireframe and you can see the joint inside the sword. That would be helpful. So again, you select to constrain, you select the hand joint first, then shift select the joint that's in the sword handle, constrain parent. So now when you rotate the hand control, the sword follows along with it. And that's how we were going to constrain weapons in. Alright, so now let's set our layers back to the way that we want them, which is when we need to add the sword to the mesh layer. So click the sword, right click the mesh layer, add selected objects. So now we can't select the sword because R is on. We want to turn off the bind joint layer and make it unselectable with R as well. And then if you drag a box over your character, you can still select that sword joint, so that also needs to get added to the bind joint layer. So select the sword joint, right click bind joint layer, add selected objects. So that when we set this up, when you drag a box over the character, the only thing you're selecting is controls. Bones go to the bind joint layer, 3D objects go to the mesh layer. Okay, and you can see how I have my layers set up over here. Certain V's off, certain P's off, and certain R's on and off. Alright, so when you're done with that, we're going to go ahead and save this scene. And you go ahead and just save it on the desktop. We're going to call this one, we'll just call it Boss Animation Ready. Boss Animation Ready. And the reason why I call it the Animation Ready file is so that it's very easy for animators to understand which file they're supposed to animate, and yeah. And that's it. So then this file's all set up, ready to go. Animator can't break it too much. Pass it to an animator. And you just want to make sure that your directory structures are set up, you know, when you're creating character structures in the project. Because as a rigger, it's going to be your responsibility to, like, rig the characters, set them up for animation, make any adjustments. So you want to be, like, really organized, because as a project goes from, like, start to finish, all kinds of shit's going to go down, and it's just shit's gonna break all over the place. And the more organized you are, the better off you'll be. Another good tip is to make copies of your files as you go along in the project. So for example, this rig file, I can just grab it and just hold control and move it, and it makes a copy. And what I can do is I can go in here and name this. So today's date is 4/3/18. So I know that this rig was at 4/3/18. Just as you go through a project, if you just make backups of your files, because you could be working in this giant file and Maya could decide that it wants to corrupt the file, and then you're screwed, right? Now granted, we all work in source control with source tree and all this stuff, so we can always do that, but it's always good to just make backups as you go along. Is everybody in here, I assume, fallen victim to a crash or a computer reboot or a file getting corrupted? Yeah. So as you become more senior and you work, you're going to start to realize that how valuable backups are, right? Never take any risks and chances.
No, don't worry, Ninja.
Alright, you guys, that's it for today. Anybody have any questions on this stuff? This is just like file setup, scene management, nothing crazy, but it's definitely valuable info. Cool.